Well, welcome everyone to the Requirement Working Group Exchange Cafe. The topic of this Exchange Cafe will be System of Systems Challenges, led by Beth Wilson. TechOps encourages collaboration between the working groups, and Beth is a member of the Requirement Working Group, but Beth is also a member of the System of Systems Working Group and the Security Working Group. She also played a big role in influencing what's in our products, the Needs and Requirements Manual, and our Guide to Verification Validation. Our goal is for other working groups to use those manuals and guides as a foundation, and then to develop guides tailored to their specific domain knowledge. And so Beth thought it would be good to do that for System of Systems and also for system security. The meeting will begin with a summary of the System of System challenges when it comes to defining needs and requirements and verifying the System of System meets the requirements and validating that the System of System meets the needs. The session will then be open for general discussion concerning System of Systems. What is common to System of Systems? What is unique for System of Systems? This meeting will set a stage for the August 24th session, where we will kick off a project to develop a System of Systems guide that tailors the Requirement Working Group products, including the Needs and Requirements Manual, the Guide to Needs and Requirements, and the Guide to Verification and Validation to address the unique challenges for a System of System. A little bit about Beth. She earned her PhD in electrical engineering from the University of Rhode Island. She's retired from Raytheon, where she worked for 33 years as a design engineer, program manager, research scientist, functional manager, and test director on sonar, satellite, and radar programs. She was a Raytheon certified architect and a Raytheon certified Six Sigma expert. Dr. Wilson is currently an adjunct professor at Worcester Polytechnic Institute in their Master of Science in Systems Engineering program. She's an NCOSE Expert Systems Engineering Professional, ESAP, NCOSE Certification Advisor Group CAG Chair, co-chair of the NCOSE Systems Security Engineering Working Group, a member of the System of Systems Working Group, and the Requirements Working Group. Upcoming events that we're having is the August 24th is the next session that Beth will also lead, like we talked about. And then on September 28th, we'll have an open Exchange Cafe focusing on interfaces. And then October 26th and November 16th, Beth will come back and do a similar thing for the System Security Working Group. And December 14th, Henrik Matfork will give a presentation on configuration management across the digital thread. This is a follow-on to a presentation he gave for IW in January. And then in January, we'll have sessions for the International Workshop. We plan on having 2 days the week prior to the workshop with presentations and discussions like we did last year. And with that, I'll turn this over to Beth.
All right. Yeah, so Lou, if you could just help me out if somebody put something in the chat, because I won't necessarily see that. Today, we're going to focus on the System of System challenges that are related to needs, requirements, verification, and validation. And then this is going to set the stage for our next meeting in August, where we're going to kick off a new project to develop a guide for System of System practitioners on how to use the Requirements Working Group products. And as a note, I pulled all of this stuff from a WPI micro course that we have in system engineering awareness. It's a digital badge offering that we have. So I'm not going to send the slides out, and I'm not making them available for distribution because it is part of that course that WPI has. All right, let's start with the definition. So there's some ISO standards that relate to System of Systems. They all have the same definition, and that is, and so you'll see me looking at my slide when I'm reading off of it. The definition is a set of systems or system elements that interact to provide unique capability that none of the constituent systems can accomplish on its own. It's a very long-winded way of saying systems that have synergy. Okay, so that you have a capability that is more than the sum of the parts. And then there's also an INCOSE system of systems primer that begins with the sentence, a system of systems is a collection of independent systems integrated into a larger system that delivers unique capabilities. And I've posted a picture of the primer on the left side part of the slide. The INCOSE system of systems primer is available from the INCOSE store, and it's a very good summary document. Mine is well worn. It's I think it's only eight pages, 8 or 10 pages. So it's it's not as long as our requirements working group products. I'll say that. Okay. So the graphic at the bottom is from the SE handbook, and that attempts to show what we're talking about here. So if you look in the middle, there's an air traffic control system. Now that's a system. And when we integrate the air traffic control system with the ticketing system and the airport system and the fuel distribution system and the aircraft system, we end up with an air transport system of systems. And then when we have that interact with the ground transport system and a maritime transport system, we have a transport system of systems. Right. So it just means that when you bring the systems can interact on their own, and they're in their systems themselves, but then when we bring multiple systems together, we end up with capability that is more than what any of those systems can deliver. Now, there is some controversy when people describe that they have a system of systems, and you can imagine that because we have difficulty with everybody agreeing what a system is. Okay, so for some, a system is the aircraft and the engine is a component. For the team that designs and builds the engine, they think their engine is a system and the pieces that make up their engine are the components. The key point is that the systems in a system of system can stand on their own. And when they interact, they provide a capability that's greater than what any individual system can provide. All right, so when we talk about system of system characteristics, this is the list that Mark Mayer came up with that we can use to kind of test ourselves. This is what he put forward as characteristics for system of systems. And the primer talks about emergency response as a system of systems as an example. So let me use that as an example. So you have as a system the fire station, the ambulance service, the police station, the hospital, et cetera. So these are constituent systems that are each independently operated and managed. The fire station is autonomous. It can operate on its own, responding to fires, and it has its own budget, its own staffing, its own equipment, its own protocols. And the same is true for an ambulance. Same is true for the hospital. Same is true for the police. They each operate on their own. But then, so that's where we could show that they're operationally and managerially independent. As constituent systems are distributed. The fire station, the ambulance, the police, and the hospital services are physically located in different places. The system of system that represents the emergency response evolves over time. For the emergency response example, a geographic region might start out with 1 or 2 fire stations or 1 or 2 police departments. And as anticipated needs change and more budget is available, the system of system will evolve to add or modify services. The equipment will change, protocols for interaction between the services will change. Okay. And the system of system has emergent behavior. This points to the synergy I mentioned. So that this is the result of all the interactions between the constituent systems. So this allows the system of system to achieve capability that the individual systems couldn't do on their own. All right. So in the emergency response example, the ambulance staff may need the police to help them gain access to the area, or the fire crew to gain access to the building. right? The police that responds to an accident, or they may need the ambulance system to take the injured to the hospital. Together, the service systems work together to address more complex emergencies that require the coordinated systems to be successful. Each of these can operate on their own, but then when they work together, they become a service that's more than what any of the systems alone can provide. We also have 4 different types of systems, and that's based on the level of operational and managerial independence that we have in the constituent systems. These are the 4 categories that are recognized by the system of systems community, and they were codified in the ISO standard 21841. So a directed system of system means that the system of system has all the authority. It has all the objectives, it has the management, it has the funding, and it has the technical authority. It can come up with capabilities and allocate requirements to the constituent systems. The system of system is created and is managed to fulfill a specific purpose. So what happens is the changes that are made in the system of system are made at the system of system level and directed to the constituent systems. We also have acknowledged system of systems. So, and let me give you an example. I was just looking at the picture I had there. Then the primer uses as an example some of these metropolitan transportation systems like the California high-speed highway is one of the case studies that I use in some of my classes. Each of the pieces are independent and they operate autonomously, but the constituent systems have to accept operational director in order to participate in the transportation system of systems. All right, so an acknowledged system of systems, you still have a system of systems hierarchy, you still have management, funding, and authority in the system of systems, but the systems have their own management, funding, and authority. Okay, so you have the system of systems has recognized objectives, it has a designated manager, it has resources for the system of systems organization, but the systems are all being developed in parallel with the system of systems. So what happens here is changes in the system of systems are based on agreements between the system of systems and the constituent services. So the example the system of systems primer uses is air traffic control. It talks about how you have airport radars, air traffic control terminals. There's other parts of the individual airport that are all systems themselves, and each of those pieces are funded separately to meet their requirements. But the system designers support global airspace regulations and they support global airspace protocols. In a collaborative system of systems, you don't have top-down objectives. You don't really have management or funding or authority at the system of systems level. It's more that the systems voluntarily work together to solve a complex problems. The primer uses the electric grid as an example. So each system can produce and transmit and distribute electricity to its consumers, but they interact with each other and adhere to standards and regulations, and the constituent systems participate in developing those standards. In a virtual system of systems, there's no central authority, there's no central purpose. The systems probably don't even know about each other. The virtual system of system has large scale behavior, but the systems are not interacting to achieve a particular system of systems goal. The primer identifies the internet as an example of this because there's no management or governance regarding usage and there's no central purpose. So this is just some examples of the different ways that we can classify the types of system of systems. And a system of systems doesn't necessarily have to stay in the same place. So for example, the primer talks about the internet as a virtual SOS, but the standards talk about the internet as a collaborative SOS, saying that the networks that are on the internet networks follow protocols and there are standards for their communication. So you could think of that example in both cases. the GPS is one of my favorite case studies that we do as a system of systems, because it started out as a directed system of system in 1973 when the military decided that they were going to put forward the GPS constellations and design that as a system of systems. That was directed. It then later became collaborative because you had different military systems that were using the GPS system, and then as different pieces of the GPS, the ground stations, the satellites, the interactions, as they started to become go under updates that were funded, that was more like an acknowledged system of systems. Certainly in the military part of the GPS updates is an acknowledged system of systems. But then when we think about all the things that use GPS in the car, or what I use on my golf, on the golf course, those commercial devices, those are more like a virtual system of systems because they don't even know where they are. Okay, so these are mostly just to be able to understand there's different challenges in each type of system of systems, and that there isn't one type. There's a different there's a range of the way that these can be managed and operated. Now, one of the key things that we came out with this was several years ago, that we identified the system of systems pain points, and these are described in the handbook, also in the primer. These are challenges that provide focus for developing system of systems techniques and competencies. And this slide just summarizes the pain points. Certainly, the authority is an issue if you're trying to have collaboration and agreement between constituent systems that you don't have authority over their funding or their requirements. So that is a pain point. There's a similar pain point in leadership, where the system systems leaders need to be able to foster collaboration between constituent systems they don't have authority over. The constituent system pain point addresses the fact that we have individual system goals, but recognizes that we have legacy systems that may be difficult to adapt. The capabilities and requirements pain point is one that I think that's a key for our discussion. This is about the fact that we have different ways the capabilities are expressed at a system level and a system of system level. And there's a challenge for the system of systems when the constituent systems have their own requirements. Autonomy, interdependence, and emergence is a pain point where the complex interactions and interdependencies between the constituent systems can lead to unanticipated emergent effects. Now, some of the anticipated emergent effects are what define the system of systems, that synergy that I spoke of. But we can also have some unexpected effects that happen as the systems come together and interact. The testing pain point is also one that I think is important to our discussion, because it focuses on the system of systems level verification and how do we validate the capability. Because as the systems are prepared for delivery, end-to-end testing that seems to be critical to determine that the system of system is meeting its functional and performance requirements in the intended environment is difficult to do because the systems come together at different times. So that end-to-end testing that we expect to have and talk about in our requirements working group products, it's difficult to do, if not impossible. And then the system of systems principles pain point is identifying gaps and best practices for the practitioners. Yeah. So let's take a look at these two that I had highlighted. The first one being the capabilities and requirements. So the issue here is that each constituent system owns its own requirements, and those requirements define their capabilities, the system's capabilities. The system of system is working on expectations at a high level, capability level. So the system of system needs translate into requirements, and some of these requirements may be inconsistent with what the constituent system has identified as needs. So each constituent system has its own constraints and limits that may make it difficult for them to support the system of systems capability need. So even if we can adapt a constituent system, it's going to require resources to make that change. So addressing this pain point means translating end-to-end capabilities at the system of system levels into requirements that can be experienced at the constituent systems level. And then the testing is, I mean, testing is challenging enough, but bringing different systems together at different times in the development cycle, it really makes test planning a challenge. It makes it's just the scale and complexity of the system makes the idea of this end-to-end testing challenging, expensive. Now, we've been doing some work in using modeling and simulation to help with the end-to-end expectation of what the behavior would be. Modular architectures help in terms of change propagation to make sure that we know what happens when one system changes. How is that going to affect the system of systems? But verification and validation is a significant pain point at the system of systems level. And then the last piece is the core system, core elements of system of systems. SOS, systems engineering. So these are the system of systems focus for the system of systems practitioner. So the starting point is understanding the capability objectives, because the system of system is delivering high level capabilities, but these high level capabilities are implemented by capabilities in the constituent systems. The practitioner also needs to understand the systems and their relationships to identify the constituent system functions and their data exchange, and understand how the different systems are going to interact with each other. The next focus is to assess how well the constituent systems address the capability objectives at the higher level. So this means establishing metrics and working with the test and evaluation team for each constituent system to determine what measures we're going to use to assess operational performance. And then, developing and evolving a system of systems architecture. This is not an architecture that we think of like a systems architecture in the conventional form, but rather how do we define the system of systems ConOps so that we can define how all the constituent systems will work together. Okay. And then the system of systems will then evolve as we have updates. And so we need to monitor the changes in the constituent systems, because the changes happen at the constituent system level. So how do we know when a system changes what the impact's going to be to the system of systems? As we address the requirements and solution options, we need to look at how the individual systems are managing their requirements and how that impacts the system of system objectives. And then orchestrating upgrades. This is how do you coordinate changes that are going to occur at a constituent system level that will impact the system of systems. Okay. So the discussion that we want to have today is, where does system of systems engineering fit on this graphic? Right. So this, we've talked about the system of systems is at the capability level and doesn't really have requirements, but is there a way to talk to system of system practitioners so that they can see themselves in this graphic? And that's the piece that I want to kick off with our discussion. All right, so I see some things in the chat. Oh, good, Lou, you put a link in the chat to the primer.
Courtney indicated that she'd read the primer and really liked it. Susan commented that she's in the process of having to deal with system to system, very timely. To me, if you're talking about the capability level, I would think that we're really focusing at the beginning on the needs. The problem's going to be solved the overall mission for the system of systems and the needs. And then those are going to have to be somehow allocated to the different constituent systems that make up the system of systems. And then they're each going to have to then decide what specific requirements apply to them in order to meet the needs that they're supporting.
Yeah, and I think what happens is you end up with the system of interest is there's multiple systems of interest and there's interaction between them. So if the system of systems is defining the integrated set of needs, the transformation into design input requirements may not be the transformation that we talk about in the manual and the guides, but rather an allocation or a opportunistic mapping. And there is a system of systems architectures.
Susan's raising her hand.
So I think it depends on when you say the needs, it's based on it's on the perspective of whoever the user is, right? And that's kind of where I see it in terms of depending on who you are and where you're at. If you're looking at the whole system together, then where those end users and the operators fit is where the needs are and where the capture is. So it really depends on what level of the system. So I'm personally working on a system, it's multiple radio systems, but if you look at it together from the user perspective, all of it together is a system. And so from their perspective, it really should be treated like, the directed type system, whereas there's one manager, there's one throat to choke, right? Whereas each system independently, has its own users, but if you're trying to work across systems from the user perspective, it's not nearly as easy. So that's my comment, is that just from that user perspective.
But see, the user changes. So the constituent system has users, and then the system of system has users.
Correct.
So they're different users, and sometimes they're conflicting.
Mm-hmm. It's true.
Yeah, and I worked on a program where we were designing one of the constituent systems in a system of systems, and then another user came along and said, well, if you do it this way, we can use it too. And so everybody thought that was a great idea. But then when it came time for us to put that in, our funding, the contracting officer that was responsible for schedule and budget was like, no, just do my requirements. Don't be late and overrun on my program. If you can, accidentally cover what they want, that's good. So that's when you go, oh boy.
Yeah. So who's managing the money?
Right. Yeah, because what my concern is that a system of systems practitioner would open up the manual. Are we still calling it the needs, requirements, verification, validation, lifecycle manual?
We shortened it to just the needs and requirements manual, and then a subtitle that talks about needs, requirements, verification, validation across the life cycle. But people thought that other was too long, so we shortened to just the needs and requirements manual.
Okay. So when a system of systems practitioner opens up the needs and requirements manual, my concern is that they're going to say, oh, this is for systems, not systems. I don't know if we would generate a different thing that talks about capabilities and allocating, whether you'd have a guide for an acknowledged versus a directed. I don't find that many directed system of systems. I find more that are acknowledged. Would we come up with a subset of that would make sense? Or do we do some kind of a mapping that says when you see the words integrated set of needs, that's a system of systems capability. When you see a design input requirements, that's a constituent system. It'd be a allocation. Is there a mapping? Would that be a better way to make this relevant to system of system practitioners?
Fundamentally, isn't, a system, it's called system of system, but it is a system. And so the needs and requirements manual applies to any system of interest, whether it's a classic system or a system of systems. I think that the biggest piece of this is the holistic view of the interaction of the parts and who has control over dictating what those interactions are. a system, you outlined a whole lot of challenges that the classic system doesn't have.
Mhm.
So a lot of it has to do with the architecting and the interaction piece. When I was supporting the Naval Research Lab and the Clementine project, I know when we launched, it was amazing. You know, we had our own ground control system, we had our own ground servicing system for the spacecraft, but then we were integrated with another system called the launch vehicle. And then the launch vehicle was integrated into the launch site. And then we had the Western Test Range that controlled things, but then we were using Air Force assets for communication around the world and Navy assets. And what we found is a lot of the existing systems that we were bringing together in order to have this capability to launch our satellite, those existing systems requirements were generally fixed, and we had to adhere to their requirements. We really couldn't dictate to them a whole lot of stuff. They were designed to support our system, but they had fixed requirements and we had to live within their rules.
Right. And I think that's the important part where the constituent system has requirements. Part of what the system of systems engineer is doing in the requirements analysis phase is determining where they can use what's already there. And the analysis of alternatives is about how do you combine and interact with these constituent systems, because you may not be able to change them. Now, certainly if you have a legacy system, you're trying to bring it in, you can't change it. So we have some things in the chat, and we also have Carlo has a hand up.
Yeah, if possible. I was thinking that there are two main challenges we are affording when developing and more than operating system of systems in the liquid food packaging industry. And the one is that typically there are great differences among the maturities of the single systems to be integrated into the system of systems. Some are legacy, some are completely new, and so the autonomous behaviors are more than probable. The second thing is the change in time of the stakeholders at different levels. This means that when you start, you have several typically well-known stakeholders, but when the systems gets into validation and operations, typically many of them changed. Also their needs changed, or because time passed and there are new challenges of the markets and new challenges also in the technologies. So it's important to keep into account these two aspects, because the original set of needs can be severely affected by these changes due to time, technologies, or market pushes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And that complements what you put in the chat about you have different maturities among the single systems. They're coming together at different times. The stakeholders are at different levels. That makes sense. And you bring up an important point about the technology, because you may have a directed system of systems, but then your upgrade path, you're not going to have technology insertion that's synchronized. The different systems are going to upgrade and change at different rates.
Absolutely, and many of the technologies are not at all in your hands. For example, very simply, the operating systems of internet or networks in different countries change relatively frequently. And you design for a certain way of communicating among the systems, and then it doesn't work because someone changed at the top level the full communication system. That can be a serious issue for practical things. Simply, you cannot receive the data. You want to store the data of the system working, then you cannot do it because you simply don't receive them. Looks a little trivial, but it happens.
Yeah. And we've been talking about technology. I think it's also important to understand that part of the system of system design is the protocols and the human behavior, the way people are going to interact with things, that when something changes in the emergency system example, if there are changes to privacy, as an example, that changes protocols. Does that change the way that the systems interact? And that's just an example of not a technology, but something that gets imposed that changes.
Francisco has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you very much, Lou. In order to answer the original question, how a systems of system requirement engineering fits into these graphics, I tried to answer the question why there is a need to have a systems of systems. I think there are two scenarios. The first one is that there are already existing systems, and at a certain point, due to evolution of the world, of the human being, there is a need of let's say, a new capability that can be, let's say, obtained by those already existing systems. Or maybe there is a possibility to share resources in order to obtain something new. Like, for instance, if you consider the police and the ambulance, there is a need to cooperate when there is an accident between vehicles, because police is coming and calling an ambulance to take the injuries. However, they have different objectives, because the police is not only there for accidents, but for many other things that are completely not related to the ambulance. So it is just a share of some objectives and some sub-capabilities that, when they are combined, they provide the capability of the emergency system, if we take that example. So if I think into these two scenarios, then I think that the development of requirements for systems of systems probably is more similar to the development of requirement for legacy systems, because you do not develop a completely a new set of requirements, but in many cases you have a lot of constraints given by the already existing systems that will become constituents of the new system of system. And also, so in the scenario one, in scenario two, we need to select those requirements related to the constituents that are important for the system of system. And we should not consider all requirements of the constituents, because otherwise we violate the rule that if there is a child requirement, there should be also a parent requirement. Because, you know, if you have a requirement of certain capabilities of the police that that they are not used in the emergency system, those should be not considered in order to not violate that rule. So in my understanding, if I look to the principles of requirement engineering, I think this graphic is still valuable, because the principles are the same. The difference is that we have to deal with constraints already existing requirements coming from the constituents. So this transformation does not create new things, but there will be a reuse. So maybe a peculiarity of a system of system requirement engineering is that requirements will be also important during the entire life cycle. That's something specific of system of system, in the sense that usually for a normal product like a car, you have the requirements, you develop the car, and then you put in operation, and that's it, and you forget about requirements. In a system of systems, the constituents will continue to provide requirements along the life cycle to the system of systems. So that's important to keep the management of the requirements along the entire life cycle. And this is becoming more important than, let's say, simple products. So maybe that's a big difference.
Yeah, I like that thinking. And, you know, I like the idea of looking at this and saying, no, this applies. That system of interest can be a system of system. But where it might be different for a system of systems is instead of soliciting the needs and then using those needs to derive and decompose and write requirements from a system of systems perspective, we may be saying we need to look at potential constituent systems where we can opportunistically harvest the requirements, and as you point out, only take the requirements that are relevant. before we move to the next hand that's raised, I did want to comment on Carlo has in the chat about the needs related to the system of system are managed at a higher level systems architect that coordinates the needs of the single systems architects. And the system of systems architecture is an important part of the design. And so I think if we can relate that to the architecture, and the architecture will show the different constituent systems, and it will show end-to-end ConOps. So in that regard, but the difference between a system of systems architecture and a system architecture is the system of systems architecture is focused on the interaction of the constituent systems.
And it's also important to take into account one thing that one aspect is that also, let's call them low-level requirements. For example, space occupation, which is present in every one of the systems, has to be managed according to the system of systems requirements by itself. For example, if there's not enough space in one station to host the ambulance, the police, and the fireworks, then and the firemen, then most probably the three of them cannot operate at the same time, but they must operate at the same time. So space, for example, or energy, for example, energy sufficient to be operated. The issues related by fire in the south of Europe in these days are a clear example. There are the forces, but they tend to interact in an environment which is crowded of everyone needing the same sources of energies. And that is not a favorable combination.
Yeah, I do want to comment on Lou's chat there where he said, I think that fundamentally the constituent systems must have been designed to be part of an SOS. That's not always the case. Sometimes you're designing a system of systems and you're out looking for constituent systems that can meet that. And one example that I know of is in Boston, we had the Boston Marathon bombing incident that happened. And the next year, there was a concerted effort to make that situation more secure, to make it so that the marathon would be safe. And that was months in the making. That was a system of systems, and there was not time to design any system to meet the system of systems need. And so that was a lot of companies coming together and saying, I have this, this does this, and then figuring out how to make them all work together.
Each of those consistent systems really is the people, product, and process.
Right.
Then I can see that a constituent system with those three elements, even though it may have not originally been designed to be part of the system, somewhere those three will have to be modified somewhat to allow it to be part of the system to meet the system of systems needs and capabilities.
Right. Right. And sometimes you're satisfying the system of system objective with technology. Sometimes you're satisfying it with a revised process and training. Ernie had a hand up.
Yeah, thank you. To address Carlo's point earlier about asynchronous fielding of component systems, that the background I've had with many systems like that opens up a huge can of worms with respect to verification and also configuration management. You just buy yourself a seemingly endless series of regression tests, and every regression test will end up tweaking the solution, which gets you more configuration management problems, which then buys you more regression tests, and on and on and on. My background is DoD verifications with fairly complex systems, and we just could never break that chain. So just wanted to throw that out there.
I called that verification by exhaustion.
Excellent terminology.
Mm-hmm.
Next month is really to the continuation of this as well, this discussion.
So what we're going to talk about in August is how does a system of system use a system of systems practitioner use these working group products. And Courtney has a comment in the chat that can constituent systems be included against their will? And in the virtual system of systems, that's exactly what happens. They don't know about each other, and they may not realize they're being pulled in. And there was a comment earlier about, system of systems trying to use existing systems to be able to be more cost effective, to be able to more rapidly deploy a new solution. And that's exactly what was happening with the GPS example, because the Navy had a navigation system, the Air Force had a navigation system, and in 1973, they got together and said, okay, this doesn't make sense for every service to build satellites and build their own unique system. We should figure out what would work for all of us. And that became the directed SOS. That was the initial GPS for the military. And Lou's pointed out that security within an SOS has its own challenges. That's definitely one of the things that we've been talking about with the system of systems and the security working groups, that a system of systems in a cyber contested environment, you can't send a patch out to everything at the same time. And how do you make it so that you have end-to-end security of your messages when you're across different systems? So it's definitely a challenge.
I think it's a very, very good point to discuss how to use well and how much I've used the references by Nkosi in real life.
Yeah, and one of the things I like about the emergency services example is that you can see it changing, right? So if there's some disaster that happens, you will see the system of systems emerging to address something that's more complex. Think about the condo that collapsed in Florida, or you think about when a hurricane hits an area, or even with the fires, wildfires that the emergency services are responding to. So these, you see how that particular need will say, okay, how do we do this? Do we need, and we bring in, individuals' emergency systems from different states, if that's going to help. All right, we're coming up on 5 o'clock. Any other comments? I'm hoping everybody comes back in August.
Definitely coming back. Thank you.
We can go ahead and stop this session. If you haven't read the SOS primer, we put the link on here, so it'd be great if everyone read that beforehand. And so the next session will be focusing on the tailoring of what's in the needs and requirements manual to a system of systems specific case. We will send out the announcements ahead of time, both on Yammer and through the RWG mailing list. And Beth, if you can get it out to the system of systems working group distribution, that would be great also.
Okay, sounds good.
So I'm going to stop the recording. The recording will be posted within a week on the Requirement Nkosi YouTube page also. And we'll send out an announcement when that happens.
Yeah, as soon as I get that, I'll forward it to the System of Systems Working Group.
Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording.